The ship came out of nowhere. Marcus Chen was eating noodles in the small kitchen of his cargo hauler when the alarms started screaming. Red lights flashed across every wall. The computer voice said words he never wanted to hear. Unknown vessel. Weapons locked. He dropped his food and ran to the cockpit. Through the front window, he saw something that made his stomach turn cold. A ship the size of a small city floated in space before him. It was black and covered with strange symbols that seemed to move and shift like living things. No human had ever seen anything like it. Marcus had been hauling medical supplies to a colony on the edge of known space. It was supposed to be a simple job. 3 weeks out, 3 weeks back, and enough money to fix his ship's broken heating system. He was nobody special. Just a 34-year-old man trying to make a living among the stars. "This is cargo vessel Dawnrunner," Marcus said into his communication system. His voice was calm, even though his hands were shaking. "I am a civilian. I carry no weapons. Please identify yourself." The response came not through his speakers, but directly into his mind. It was like ice water being poured into his brain. Words that were not words. Meaning without sound. "You are collected. Do not resist. Resistance causes pain." A beam of green light shot from the massive ship and wrapped around the Dawnrunner. Marcus felt his vessel shake and groan as it was pulled forward. He tried the engines. Nothing. He tried the emergency thrusters. Nothing. Every system on his ship went dark except for the life support. He sat back in his pilot chair and took a deep breath. Fear was there, yes. It sat in his chest like a cold stone. But Marcus had felt fear before. He had felt it when his sister died in a car accident when he was 16. He had felt it when his oxygen tank failed during a spacewalk 3 years ago. He had felt it every time he jumped into hyperspace, knowing that one small error could scatter his atoms across 1,000 light years. Fear was an old friend. An unwelcome one, but familiar. The green light pulled his ship into the belly of the alien vessel. Marcus watched through his window as massive doors closed behind him, sealing him inside a hangar that could hold 100 ships like his. Strange creatures moved in the darkness. They had too many legs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. His airlock hissed open without his command. They were already inside his ship's systems. Marcus stood up slowly. He walked to the airlock and waited. If he was going to die, he would do it on his feet. The creatures that entered his ship were nightmares given flesh. They stood on 6 legs, each one ending in a sharp point that clicked against the metal floor. Their bodies were covered in hard shells the color of dried blood. Their faces, if you could call them faces, had no mouth, just a cluster of black eyes and 2 long feelers that moved constantly, tasting the air. One of them was larger than the others. It wore a golden band around one of its front legs. A leader, Marcus guessed. The leader's thoughts pushed into Marcus's mind again. You will come. You will not resist. Marcus nodded once. All right. He walked forward, and the creatures surrounded him. They led him through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that hurt his eyes. The walls were not made of metal or plastic, but something that looked almost organic. Like walking through the veins of some giant creature. Other beings were in cages along the walls. Marcus saw creatures of all shapes and sizes. Some looked like floating jellyfish. Others were made of living rock. A few looked almost human, but with too many arms or skin the color of the sky. All of them were screaming or crying or simply staring at nothing with broken eyes. Marcus felt the fear grow stronger. But he kept walking. He kept breathing. They brought him to a cell made of glass. The walls were thick and clear, and Marcus could see that he was being watched. Cameras or eyes or something else tracked his every movement. He stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. The cell was empty, except for a small bed, and a hole in the floor that he assumed was for waste. No food, no water. Nothing to do but wait and be watched. Marcus sat down on the floor, crossing his legs beneath him. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A technique his therapist had taught him years ago, back when the nightmares about his sister's death had been so bad he couldn't sleep. Time passed. He didn't know how much. Hours, maybe. Or days. There was no way to tell in this place. Through the glass, he could see the leader creature standing at some kind of control panel. Other aliens moved around it, their leg points clicking in a rhythm that might have been speech. They were watching him with their many eyes, studying him, waiting for something. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at the leader. He smiled. It was not a brave smile or a crazy smile. It was simply the smile of a man who had accepted his situation. He could not escape. He could not fight. He could only wait and see what happened next. And in that waiting, in that acceptance, there was a strange kind of peace. The leader's feelers stopped moving. Its thoughts touched Marcus's mind, and for the first time, Marcus felt something like confusion in them. "You do not fear," the thought said. It was not a question. "I do fear," Marcus replied, speaking out loud even though he knew the creature could read his mind. "I fear a lot of things, but fear is not my master. It's just a feeling, like being cold or hungry. It tells me something is wrong, but it doesn't control what I do." The leader was silent for a long moment. Then it turned and spoke to the others in that clicking language. Marcus saw their body language change. Some of them stepped back. Others leaned forward with new interest. They had found something unexpected. Something they didn't understand. Marcus kept smiling. He didn't know what was coming next, but he had survived 34 years on a planet that had tried to kill him with diseases, disasters, and his own kind. He had survived the cold emptiness of space. He had survived loss and pain and loneliness. Whatever these creatures had planned for him, he would face it the same way he faced everything else, one breath at a time. Commander Yethris had conquered 37 worlds. He had broken the minds of generals and kings. He had watched the proudest warriors of a dozen species fall to their knees and weep like newborn larvae. In all his years of service to the Voxel Dominion, he had never seen anything like this human. The creature just sat there, breathing, smiling, waiting. What do we know about its species? Yethris asked his second-in-command, a smaller voxel named Kessex, who handled information and records. Kessex pulled up data on the holographic display. They call themselves humans. They come from a planet called Earth, in a system our scouts marked as low priority. A young species. They have only been traveling between stars for about 200 of their years. Threat level? Minimal, according to the original assessment. They have basic weapons. No mental abilities. Short lifespans. Their bodies are fragile. They can be killed by temperature changes, lack of water, or simple falls from height. Kessex paused. They should be easy to break. Yethris looked at the human through the observation window. Marcus was still sitting in the same position, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He looked like he was meditating, like he was at peace. Then why does this one not scream? Yethris asked. Why does it not beg or cry or beat its hands against the walls like every other species we have collected? Kessex had no answer. The Voxel Dominion had built their empire on one simple truth. Every thinking creature was afraid of something. Fear was the key that unlocked every mind. Fear was the weapon that made all other weapons unnecessary. Why waste soldiers in battle when you could simply make your enemies destroy themselves from the inside? 10,000 years ago, Voxel scientists had created their greatest invention. They called it Compound Theories 9. The other species they conquered called it horror gas. The gas did not hurt the body. It did something far worse. It went into the brain and found the deepest fears that lived there. Not the small fears, like being afraid of the dark or of loud sounds. The gas found the ancient fears, the ones that had been written into a species over millions of years of evolution. The fears that were so deep, most creatures did not even know they existed until the gas dragged them screaming into the light. For the insect like Keth, the gas showed them the nightmare of molting that never ended, their shells cracking and splitting forever, leaving them soft and vulnerable for all time. The Keth had surrendered their entire civilization after just one demonstration. For the water-breathing Dolari, the gas created the feeling of drowning that went on and on without death. Their gills filled with fluid that was not quite water, not quite air. Unable to breathe, unable to die, forever trapped in that moment of suffocation. The Dolari had given up their home ocean without a single shot being fired. Every species had their nightmare. Every species had that one thing, buried deep in their genes, that could break them completely. The voxel had found them all. They had mapped the fears of 300 different peoples. They had built an empire on terror. No creature had ever resisted the horror gas. Not one. Not in 10,000 years. Begin the interrogation protocol? Yethris ordered. Standard concentration. Kasix hesitated. Commander, should we not try simpler methods first? Physical discomfort? Isolation? The gas is usually saved for difficult subjects. This creature is difficult, Yethris said. Look at it. It has been in that cell for 2 days. No food, no water, no response. It should be panicking by now. It should be clawing at the walls. Instead, it sits there like it is waiting for a meal to be served. He turned to face Kasix directly. I want to know what this human is afraid of. I want to see it break. Begin the protocol. Kasix bowed and moved to the control panel. His leg points clicked against buttons and switches. In the ceiling of Marcus's cell, small vents began to open. Through the glass, Marcus noticed the change. He opened his eyes and looked up at the vents. A green mist was starting to flow into his cell. It moved slowly, like fog rolling across a lake. It had a faint glow to it, a sickly light that made shadows seem darker. Yethris watched closely. This was always his favorite part. The moment when a creature first breathed in the gas. The moment when their eyes went wide and their body went stiff and the screaming began. Marcus watched the gas approach. It was pretty, in a strange way, like colored smoke at a concert. He could smell it now. It smelled like copper and old books and something else he couldn't identify. Something that made the back of his brain feel itchy. He took a slow, deep breath. The gas filled his lungs. It went into his blood. It traveled up to his brain and began its work. It searched through his memories and his instincts and his genetic code. It found his fears. All of them. Every nightmare he had ever had. Every moment of terror he had ever experienced. The voxel control room was silent. Every eye was fixed on the human. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he inhaled again. Another lungful of green mist. And he smiled. Yethris felt something he had not felt in centuries. Confusion. Deep, genuine confusion. The readings on his screen showed that the gas was working. It was flooding the human's brain with fear signals. It was activating every terror response his species possessed. But the human just sat there, breathing, smiling, like he was enjoying a pleasant breeze. Increase concentration, Yethris ordered. His voice was steady, but inside, something cold was beginning to grow. Something that felt almost like worry. More gas poured into the cell. The green mist became so thick that Marcus could barely see the walls around him. He breathed it in like oxygen. He let it fill every part of him. Inside his mind. The nightmares came. He saw his sister's car, crushed and burning on the side of the road. He saw himself floating in space, his oxygen running out, the cold of the void seeping into his bones. He saw his father's face, disappointed and distant. He saw his mother's coffin being lowered into the ground. He saw cancer cells spreading through a body. He saw nuclear fire consuming cities. He saw the sun dying and the stars going dark and the universe growing cold and empty forever. Every fear a human could feel, the gas showed him. Every nightmare his species had dreamed across 1,000,000 years of evolution. Marcus sat with them all. He looked at each one. He felt the fear, really felt it, let it wash over him like a wave. And then he let it pass, because this was not new. None of this was new. Humans dreamed of these things every night. They made movies about them. They wrote books and songs about death and loss and the end of all things. They stared into the darkness and asked, what if? They imagined the worst that could happen over and over again until the worst became familiar. Marcus stood up. His legs were steady. His hands were calm. He walked to the observation window and pressed his palm against the glass. Outside, Commander Yethris took a step back. He did not mean to. His body moved on its own. Is this supposed to do something? Marcus asked. His voice was curious, polite, like a guest asking about a strange painting on the wall. In the control room, no one could speak. No one could move. They could only watch as the humans stood in a cloud of their greatest weapon, breathing deeply, waiting for an answer to his question. Yethris felt the cold thing in his chest grow larger. For the first time in his very long life, he began to wonder if the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. The control room had become very quiet. Every voxel officer stood frozen at their station, eyes fixed on the screens that showed the human in his cell. The readings made no sense. The numbers told a story that should have been impossible. The gas is working, Keswick said, his voice barely above a whisper. Look at the brain activity. His fear centers are completely active. His body is releasing stress chemicals at maximum levels. According to every measurement we have, he should be experiencing absolute terror right now. Then why is he not screaming? Another officer asked. No one had an answer. Through the glass, Marcus was walking around his cell. He moved through the thick green mist like it was nothing more than morning fog. Sometimes he would stop and close his eyes, as if listening to music that only he could hear. Then he would nod slightly and continue walking. Inside his mind, the nightmares continued their assault. The gas showed him drowning. Not the quick drowning of a man who falls into deep water, but the slow drowning of a man who watches the water rise inch by inch, knowing that death is coming and being unable to stop it. Marcus had almost drowned once, when he was 12, at a lake near his family's home. His lungs still remembered the burn of water where air should be. He acknowledged the fear. He felt it fully. Then he kept walking. The gas showed him fire. It showed him his own skin blackening and peeling, his flesh cooking from his bones, while he remained aware of every moment. Humans had feared fire since before they were truly human. It was written into their genes by 1,000,000 years of watching forests burn and villages turn to ash. Marcus had been burned before. Just a small accident with a cooking flame, but enough to know the special kind of pain that fire brings. He let the fear wash through him. He did not fight it. He did not try to push it away. He simply felt it, and then he took another breath. Commander Yethris watched all of this with growing unease. In his long career, he had seen many creatures try to resist the horror gas. Some tried to hold their breath until they passed out. Others tried to focus on happy memories, hoping to drown out the nightmares. A few of the stronger ones had managed to stay, standing for several minutes before collapsing. But no one had ever done what this human was doing. No one had ever walked through their worst fears like they were taking a stroll through a garden. "Show me his memories," Yethris ordered. "Full access. I want to see what makes this creature different." Kessex warped the controls. The voxel technology could do more than just create fear. It could also read minds, pulling memories and thoughts from a subject's brain like pulling fish from water. A new screen flickered to life, showing images from Marcus's past. The voxel officers watched in silence. They saw a young Marcus, maybe 7 or 8 years old, hiding under his blanket at night. Strange shadows moved on his bedroom wall. He was afraid of the dark, afraid of the monsters that might be hiding in his closet or under his bed. But then his mother came into the room. She sat beside him and told him a story about a brave knight who fought dragons. And when the story was over, she turned off the light and left him alone with the darkness. The darkness was still there. The fear was still there. But Marcus closed his eyes and imagined himself as the knight. He fell asleep clutching an invisible sword. The voxel saw a teenage Marcus standing at his sister's grave. Rain was falling. His parents stood on either side of him, broken and hollow. The fear of death, of loss, of being alone, pressed down on him like a physical weight. But he did not collapse. He stood there, feeling every bit of that pain, and then he went home and helped his mother make dinner. They saw Marcus in his 20s, floating in space after his safety line broke during a repair job. His oxygen was running out. His ship was too far away. This was the end, and he knew it. The fear was enormous. It filled every part of him. But instead of screaming, instead of panicking, Marcus spent his last minutes of oxygen thinking about his life. The good parts and the bad parts. The people he had loved. The mistakes he had made. He made peace with his death. And then, against all odds, his crewmate found him. She pulled him back to the ship with 30 seconds of air left in his tank. "Do you see?" Yethris said softly. He was beginning to understand, and the understanding filled him with something that felt almost like respect. Almost like fear. "See what, Commander?" Kessex asked. "This creature has been living with terror its entire life. Not just this one, but its whole species. Look at their world. Look at their history." He pulled up the data files on Earth. The other officers gathered around to watch. They saw a planet that seemed designed to kill everything on it. Earthquakes that swallowed cities. Volcanoes that buried civilizations in ash. Ice ages that covered half the world in frozen death. Diseases that killed millions in months. Predators with claws and teeth and hunger. And through all of it, the humans had survived. Not by becoming immune to fear, but by learning to live with it. They told their children scary stories before bed, preparing them for a world full of real monsters. They invented horror as entertainment, spending their free time watching movies about death and destruction. They climbed mountains that could kill them, swam in oceans that could drown them, and flew through skies that could drop them to their deaths. "They do not resist fear," Yethris said slowly. "They make friends with it. They invite it into their homes. They let it sit beside them every day of their lives." On the screen, Marcus was still walking through the green mist. He stopped in front of the observation window and looked directly at the camera. Directly at Yethris. "I know you're watching," Marcus said. His voice was calm and clear through the speakers. "I know you're trying to understand. So let me help you." He sat down on the floor, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. "Where I come from, we have a word. Courage. It does not mean being without fear. It means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Every human learns this. We learn it as children when we are afraid of the dark, but we sleep alone anyway. We learn it as adults when we are afraid of failure, but we try anyway. We learn it when we love people, knowing that one day they will die or leave us, and we love them anyway. He took a deep breath of the green gas. Your weapon shows me my fears. But I have been looking at my fears since the day I was born. I know their names. I know their faces. They are not strangers to me. They are part of who I am. In the control room, something strange was happening. The voxel officers were backing away from the screens. Their leg points clicked nervously against the floor. Even Yethris felt the urge to step back, to put distance between himself and this impossible creature. You think fear is a weapon, Marcus continued. But for us, fear is a teacher. It tells us what matters. It shows us what we need to protect. Every nightmare you put in my head, I have already faced 100 times in my own dreams. You are not showing me anything new. You are just reminding me of lessons I learned long ago. He smiled again. That small, calm smile that had unsettled Yethris from the very beginning. So thank you, I guess, for the reminder. The control room was silent. The gas continued to pour into Marcus's cell. Thick and green and full of nightmares. And the human sat in the middle of it all. Peaceful as a stone in a stream, letting the horror flow around him without ever touching the core of who he was. Commander Yethris had not slept in 3 days. He sat alone in his private chamber, surrounded by holographic screens that showed everything the Dominion knew about humanity. The more he learned, the less he understood. And the less he understood, the more the cold feeling in his chest grew. The voxel were an ancient species. They had conquered their fear of death 10,000 years ago through technology. Their bodies could be repaired. Their minds could be backed up. Their lives could be extended almost without limit. Yethris himself was over 800 years old. He had stopped counting after a while. For the voxel, death was a choice. Fear was something that happened to other species. They had become the masters of terror because they themselves had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. But now, looking at the human files, Yethris was beginning to remember. Humans lived such short lives. 80 years, if they were lucky. 100 if they were very lucky. A single eye blink compared to the voxel. And during those brief years, they absolutely knew that death was coming for them. Not as a distant possibility, but as a certainty. And yet, they did not hide. They did not spend their short lives cowering in safe rooms, avoiding all risk, trying to stretch their days as long as possible. Instead, they did the opposite. They climbed mountains just to see the view from the top, knowing that a single mistake could send them falling to their deaths. They jumped from perfectly good aircraft with only thin sheets of fabric to slow their fall. They dove into oceans so deep that the pressure could crush them like empty cans. They traveled to other planets, crossing the void in tiny metal boxes. With nothing but mathematics and hope keeping them alive, Yethris found records of something called extreme sports. Humans who deliberately put themselves in dangerous situations. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They called it fun. They said it made them feel alive. It made no sense. It made absolutely no sense. And then he found the records of human warfare. The voxel had built their empire by avoiding direct conflict. Why fight when you could simply break the enemy's will to resist? Why lose soldiers when a few canisters of horror gas could end a war before it began? Humans did not think this way. Yethris watched recordings of human battles spanning thousands of years. He saw humans charge into certain death, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. He saw soldiers throw themselves on explosives to save their friends. He saw medics run into areas of active fighting to help wounded strangers. He saw ordinary people stand against impossible odds, knowing they would lose fighting anyway. They had a concept the voxel had no word for. Several concepts, actually. Honor, sacrifice, courage. The idea that some things were worth dying for. The idea that a good death meant something. The idea that it was better to die standing than to live kneeling. "Commander?" Cassix's voice came through the communication system. "The Council wishes to speak with you." Yethris turned off the screens. He needed to face the Council, but he did not know what to tell them. How could he explain that their greatest weapon was useless against these creatures? How could he explain that humanity's weakness, their short lives, their constant awareness of death was actually their greatest strength? He made his way to the Council chamber. The 5 eldest voxels sat in their traditional positions, their ancient shells covered with the symbols of their authority. They were the ones who had approved the expansion into human space. They were the ones who had promised easy conquest. "Report," the eldest said. Her name was Thesix, and she was over 12,000 years old. "The human does not break," Yethris said simply. "Maximum concentration of horror gas has no effect. We have shown him every nightmare his species possesses. He acknowledges the fear, experiences it fully, and then continues as if nothing happened." "Impossible," another council member said. "The gas works on every species. It is scientifically designed to activate their deepest terrors." "Yes," Yethris agreed. "It works exactly as designed. The human feels the fear. Every scan confirms this. But feeling the fear and being controlled by the fear are two different things for this species." He pulled up the records he had been studying. The council watched in silence as he showed them the extreme sports, the warfare, the willing acceptance of death. "They call themselves mortals," Yethris said. "It is not a term of shame for them. It is a statement of identity. They know they will die. They have always known. And they have built their entire way of life around this knowledge." Thesix leaned forward. "Explain. Their fear of death is not hidden away like ours was. It is present every day. They think about it constantly. They write stories about it, sing songs about it, make art about it. Their religions all deal with what happens after death. Their philosophies all grapple with how to live when life is so short." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We removed our fear of death by becoming immortal. We made death irrelevant, and so we forgot what it was like to be afraid. But the humans could not do this. So instead of removing the fear, they learned to carry it. They made the fear part of themselves. They use it as a tool, as a guide, as a source of strength." "That is absurd," a council member said. "Fear is weakness. Fear is what we exploit. How can fear be a source of strength?" Yethris thought of the human sitting calmly in his cell, breathing in enough horror gas to break 1,000 voxel soldiers. "Because they have practiced," he said. "Every day of their short lives they practice facing their fears. They do it deliberately. They seek out frightening experiences on purpose. They watch terrifying stories for entertainment. They push themselves to the edge of death again and again, just to prove that they can. By the time they are adults, they have faced more fear than most voxel will experience in 1,000 years." The council chamber was silent. "There is more," Yethris continued. "The human has a device, a hidden communication beacon. Our sensors have confirmed it. He activated it shortly after we captured him. A rescue signal?" Thesix asked. "Yes. Human ships are already on their way. Based on our calculations, they will arrive within the next day's cycle." "How many ships?" Yethris checked his data. "At least 12. All military class. They call them the Colonial Defense Force." One of the council members made a sound of dismissal. 12 ships? We can destroy 12 ships with a single volley." "Yes," Yethris agreed. "But can we break the crews? Can we use the horror gas on soldiers who have spent their entire lives training to face fear? Can we defeat an enemy who considers death an acceptable price for protecting their people?" No one answered. "The human in our cell is a cargo hauler," Yethris said. "Not a soldier. Not a warrior. Just a simple civilian who moves supplies from one place to another. And we cannot break him. What do you think his soldiers will be like? Essex was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was troubled. Our expansion was halted at the edge of human space 300 years ago. The elders who made that decision are all dead now. Their records were sealed. I thought they were simply being cautious. She looked at the image of Marcus, still sitting peacefully in his cell. Now I wonder if they knew something we had forgotten. In his cell, Marcus opened his eyes. He had felt something change. The gas was still flowing. The nightmares were still coming, but there was something else in the air now. Something that felt almost like help was coming. He just had to hold on a little longer. He smiled and closed his eyes again, making peace with his fears one more time. The first explosion shook the entire station. Marcus felt the floor tremble beneath him. The green gas swirled as the air system stuttered. Through the thick mist, he could see warning lights flashing beyond the glass walls of his cell. The voxel officers were running in all directions, their leg points clicking frantically against the floor. They had come. His people had come for him. In the command center, Yethris watched his screens with a feeling he barely recognized. It took him a moment to put a name to it. Panic. He was feeling panic. The human ships had arrived faster than expected. They came out of hyperspace in perfect formation, 12 vessels moving like a single creature. They did not attempt to communicate. They did not offer terms. They simply opened fire. Deploy the gas. One of the council members shouted through the communication system. Fill their ships with horror gas. Break their will to fight. We're trying, Kessex reported, his voice tight with stress. The gas is having no effect. They are wearing breathing equipment, and their ship ventilation systems are filtering our compound before it reaches concentration. Then board them. Send soldiers to take their ships by force. Yethris watched as the first boarding craft launched toward the human vessels. He watched as the human ships opened their airlocks willingly, inviting the boarding parties inside. He watched as the boarding parties were torn apart. The human soldiers fought like nothing the voxel had ever seen. They moved through their own ships with perfect knowledge of every corridor and corner. They worked in small groups, covering each other, communicating without words. And they showed no fear at all. One voxel soldier managed to deploy a canister of horror gas in a human ship corridor. The gas filled the space in seconds. The humans breathed it in. They stumbled for a moment, their faces showing the signs of terror that the gas always brought. And then they kept fighting. One human soldier, a woman with gray hair and scars on her face, killed 3 voxel while tears streamed down her cheeks. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was coming in short gasps. The fear was there, written clearly on her body. But her aim was perfect. Her movements were precise. She used the fear as fuel, burning it for energy, letting it sharpen her instead of breaking her. Impossible, Kessex whispered. This is impossible. The second explosion was closer. The station's outer hull had been breached. Human boarding parties were coming inside. Yethris made a decision. He was not sure if it was the right one, but he made it anyway. He walked to the control panel and began entering commands. "What are you doing?" Kessex asked, opening the prisoner cell. "Commander, that is against all protocols." "The protocols are useless," Yethris said. "Everything we know is useless against these creatures. Perhaps if we return their citizen, they will consider mercy." The glass walls of Marcus's cell slid open. The green gas began to flow out into the larger room, but it was thin now, the systems damaged by the battle. Marcus stood up slowly, stretching muscles that had been still for too long. "Your people are here," Yethris said through the speakers. "You are free to go." Marcus looked up at the command center window. He could see Yethris standing there, his ancient shell reflecting the red warning lights. "You could have killed me," Marcus said. "At any time. Why didn't you?" Yethris thought about the question. The truth was that he was not sure. He had wanted to understand. He had wanted to break this impossible creature, to prove that the voxel way was still supreme. But somewhere along the way, the need to understand had become more important than the need to win. "You are a mystery," Yethris said. "My species has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of fear. We believed we understood it completely. You have shown us that we understood nothing." The station shook again. Human soldiers were getting closer. Yethris could hear their gunfire in the corridors below. "Let me ask you something," Marcus said, "before I go." "Ask. What are you afraid of?" Yethris was silent. It had been so long since he had considered the question. The voxel had conquered their fears millennia ago. They had become immortal, untouchable, beyond the petty terrors that controlled lesser species. But now, watching his empire crumble around him, watching his soldiers fall to creatures who should have been easy prey, Yethris realized something. The voxel had not conquered their fears. They had simply hidden from them. They had made themselves immortal so they would not have to face death. They had created the horror gas so they would not have to face enemies in honest combat. They had built their entire civilization on the principle of avoiding anything that might make them afraid. And now, facing an enemy who embraced fear, who used it, who had made it their greatest strength, the voxel had no idea what to do. "I am afraid of you," Yethris admitted. "I am afraid of your species. Not because of your weapons or your ships or your soldiers. I am afraid because you have shown me that everything my people believed was wrong." Marcus nodded. There was no triumph in his expression. No satisfaction. Just understanding. "Fear does not make you weak," Marcus said. "Running from fear makes you weak. Hiding from fear makes you weak. But facing fear, feeling it, letting it move through you, and then letting it go, that makes you strong." He started walking toward the door of the room. Behind him, the gas continued to thin, the nightmares fading like morning mist. "You have lived for 800 years, Marcus said. "But you have never really lived at all. Because living means knowing that you will die. It means loving things that you will lose. It means trying things that might fail. It means facing every day knowing that this might be your last, and deciding that today matters anyway." The door exploded inward. Human soldiers poured through, weapons raised, ready for combat. But they found only Marcus standing calmly in the middle of the room, and Yethris watching from above. "Hold fire," Marcus said. "This one is not a threat." The soldiers hesitated, then lowered their weapons. One of them, a tall man with the insignia of a captain, stepped forward. "Mr. Chun? Are you injured?" "I am fine, Captain. Better than fine, actually. I had a lot of time to think." The captain looked at the green gas still hanging in the air, at the strange alien watching from the command center. What happened here? Marcus smiled. It was the same smile that had confused Yethris from the very beginning. The smile of a man who knew his own fears and had made peace with them. "They tried to break me," Marcus said. "They showed me every nightmare humanity has ever had. Death and fire and loss and the end of everything." He looked up at Yethris one last time, and I smiled. Because I already knew all those things. Because every human already knows. We are born knowing that we will die, that everyone we love will die, that everything we build will turn to dust. And we get up every morning, and we live anyway. We love anyway. We hope anyway. The captain did not fully understand, but he nodded. "We should go, sir. The station is falling apart." Marcus turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Commander," he called up to Yethris. "You asked what makes us different. Here is your answer. We are mortal. We have always been mortal. And we learned long ago that the only way to truly live is to accept that we will die. He stepped through the door, surrounded by soldiers who would die for him without hesitation. That is what makes us dangerous. We have nothing to lose that we were not already losing. We have nothing to fear that we were not already facing. Your weapons showed us our nightmares, and we recognized them as old friends. The last thing Yethris saw before the humans disappeared into the smoke-filled corridors was Marcus Chun looking back at him. A simple cargo hauler from a death world. A mortal creature with a short life and a fragile body, and a smile that would haunt voxel dreams for 10,000 years. The station burned. The Empire began its long, slow collapse. And somewhere in the void, human ships carried their rescued citizen home, singing songs about death and glory, and the strange courage of knowing that nothing lasts forever. They were afraid. They had always been afraid. They would always be afraid, but they did it anyway. That was what made them human.